Christmas gift. Those didn't last. If he dies.
Christmas gift robots. And if we die, we die.
No, if he dies, he dies.
Oh. And if
Dolph Lundgren.
Does that mean you guys are ready?
Yeah, we're waiting on you.
I've already started it. 2 people are watching.
Are you gonna start or not?
Yep, I'll start.
Oh, are we live?
You're making us angry.
Surely they can be mad.
Something happened to come back from my tea later.
Hater.
I think that will be fine. We have 5 people watching.
I'm kind of becoming a
6.
diva with all this filming.
You really are. My goodness.
Count it down.
Ooh, we have 10 people. Okay. It's ready. I really did start.
Good morning, Hardy Junction. I'm trying to decide what in the world these guys are laughing at. Obviously, you guys are not accustomed to being at church here because we don't start on time. But here we are, and it.
4 of us. We should be able to do it.
This is casual church today, but today's psalm is the 29th, and it is very good. So let me read this for you. Ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings, ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon to skip like a calf, and Sirion like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth and strips the forest bare. And in his temple all cry, glory. The Lord is seated over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as king forever. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. Let's pray. Father, church might be just a little bit casual today, and we're obviously late because it's my fault. But Father, what I love about this psalm is the simplicity of your power that it displays. That we all know that we're so weak and we have so many weaknesses, we have so many troubles. But when we read the psalm about your glory, about ascribing to you the things that are yours, about the power that your voice itself has, that you created the entire universe simply with the power of your voice, that Jesus with the power of his voice raised Lazarus from the dead, and that same voice is the voice that wrote for us our Bible. And when we read these words, they are your voice speaking out with that same power, with that same capability, and with that same strength. And I would just hope that as everyone's sitting at home today, I don't know what everyone's thinking about, not sure how everyone is feeling or what's going on in their minds. But Father, if we could just connect for a little while with the ability that you have through your power, it is absolutely limitless. Think about the miracles that you can do. Think about the things that you could heal us from, whether it be our body or our mind or our soul. Father, you can make us better, and that is what the psalm ends with. Father, your power is enough. May it be so for us today. Amen.
We
pray for us one more time. Father, Sunday morning is just still the best. It always is. It's been my favorite for a long, long time. It's different this week to sit and listen to you guys play some music. Glad that Lisa and Emma could come in and do a little bit of work today. Father, the last song, I was just thinking about what it would look like for Christ to actually be our all in all. If everything else was taken away, would he still be sufficient for us? If we were to make a pros and cons sheet, and on one side was Jesus and the other side was everything else, would he outweigh everything that was on the other side? And we know, I think with our minds at least, or academically, that the answer is true. But is it actually true of us? Is that how we actually live our lives? And I want that to be something that we can do. Father, be with Darrin as he prepares to teach your sermon today. A little bit different maybe than anything he's ever done before, but I can't wait to hear what it is he's got to say to us as a church. Father, it's Heart of Junction. A week in now to this sort of different way of living. For a little while, I heard this morning that 1/3 of the world now has been told to stay at home, at least for a week or two. It's a fascinating thing, but not nearly as fascinating as you are. Amen.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Zach. You forgot to dismiss the children to the nursery, but I think we'll be okay with that.
Who's the youngest?
Emma Gleason. Emma gets to go to the children's church. Blythe gets to go to the toddlers class, I guess. So, this is an unusual time and place. I have kept in communication with a lot of my pastoral friends, and several of them have talked about how odd it is to stand up in front of an empty church and preach like there's a crowd of people there. I watched about a dozen of my pastor friends preach last week, which is kind of nice to be able to have these opportunities to hear from each other. Several of them stand up and roam around the stage just like they always would, and they yell and they're pointing and things, and I know there's nobody out there. And I've got one friend who is completely under quarantine, and he preaches from his living room. And as he preaches from his living room, he has brought the pulpit from the church into his house and has it crammed there between his TV and his fireplace. And he stands behind the pulpit and preaches. And I have another friend, Josh. He said, "Why aren't we just preaching from our easy chairs?" And so today I thought I would take it easy a little bit, and we would do this very casually. And I'm glad to have the chance to talk to the church family again. This is hard. This is very difficult. Not necessarily to talk this way, but it's difficult to be the church without gathering together. I know that we talk about the fact that the church isn't a building, and some people have said that church isn't canceled, it's deployed and things, but church is also meant to be a gathering. The idea of gathering ourselves together in Hebrews says that we want to spur one another on towards love and good deeds. And it's hard to have the opportunity to do that. We had a church member last night who's okay today, and you'll probably catch it on a prayer request later on, but was at the emergency room last night, and it was very, very difficult for me to not be able to go to the hospital to be with a friend in a time of need. And I tried to go visit somebody earlier this week and was turned away at the front door of the hospital. And this is hard. It is difficult. But there's a lot about it that is that's kind of retreat oriented as well. That it's not as bad as it could be. The idea of taking time to step back and think about things. I don't know where you are. I want to use Matthew 4 today, or I'm sorry, Mark 4. I want to use Mark 4 And so if you have Bibles near you, I hope you do, or grab your phones and look up Mark 4. We're going to be at the end of the chapter. I want to use it to just discuss a little bit of what it is to kind of be inside of a little bit of turmoil. But I want to use what Mark was doing to give us some context. This is actually the passage that I used for my father's funeral. It's a passage that's important to me at that level. There's a sentence in the middle of this passage that just says Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. And there's two ways to kind of take that. One way is when we think about the idea that Jesus is not paying attention to our needs and what's going on, that he's asleep during our time of crisis. The other is that our time of crisis is literally nothing to Jesus because he's not worried about it. His perspective is totally correct. And I really wish, as we look at this passage, I really wish that there's the period after that phrase was the end of the chapter, but it's not. And so let me read the passage in Mark 4, beginning with verse 35. Let me read the entire passage to the end of the chapter, and then let's go back and look at it just a little bit deeper. It says, "That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side.' Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion." Like I say, I wish the story stopped there. I wish this was the end of chapter 4. But this is what we get. He was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." So, if we go back to verse 35 and just kind of begin with the beginning of this passage, I think there's some important things for us to figure out here. Verse 35, it says, "That day when evening came." And this is important for us to understand the context of the entire passage. That day means that this is a continuation of everything that's happened since the beginning of chapter 4. And the thing that was going on in chapter 4, the beginning of chapter 4, is that Jesus had decided on this day, this very same day, to teach a bunch of parables. Blythe, whatever you're doing, I'm sorry.
They can't hear.
Yeah,
Oh,
we're
they
trying to
can't?
fix the volume.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. So that day it is a continuation of everything that goes on chapter 4. Chapter 4 starts with Jesus telling the parable of the sower. It's a parable that we're familiar with. It's a parable that he talks about the sower spreads seed, and the seed falls in 4 different places. Some of the seed falls on the path, and Jesus teaches that seed is just like the person who hears the word and just it doesn't stick at all. There's absolutely nothing. Satan has completely made that person unable to hear the word of God in this case. There is the next seed is seed that falls in the rocky places, and Jesus says that this seed is like the person receives it with joy, but because they have no root, because they have no depth, nothing sticks. It grows up and immediately dies. The third seed falls in thorny places. Talks about, and this is where the cares of the world take away the ability for the seed to produce good life and a good crop, money and things things that maybe I talked about 2 weeks ago when we used the Sermon on the Mount. We talked about don't be anxious about anything. This is the seed that anxiety about everything kind of destroys it. And then some of the seed falls on good soil, and that's the seed that grows up and produces life and good life. And this is what Jesus is looking for as much as anything. But it goes on, and not only does he explain the parable of the sower to his disciples, like possibly during a lunch break or something, but he goes on and begins to teach a little bit more. He teaches about the light that is put on a lampstand, and it's meant to be on a lampstand to bring visibility to the growth that we're supposed to have. We're meant to be seen. He talks about the parable of a spiritual growth of the seed that grows, and the living things are meant to get bigger and stronger and better at everything that's going on. And so he's teaching all of these things. He teaches about the mustard seed and faith and all of this stuff, faith and seeds that grow and work that's meant to be seen. Even talking here about judging each other in the way that is going to show the way that you're going to be judged. All of this stuff is meant to teach us about life in the kingdom. And this very day, after he teaches all of this great, amazing stuff, on this day, they cross the river or the lake at night. And they get on a boat and they leave at night rather than waiting until the morning. And I think the connection about this day is meant to be there on purpose, because it's putting in context what people should know. I think this is almost going to be like a pop quiz. He's taught us some great stuff, and now he wants us to think about what it is that we've learned during this day. So they get on a boat. It says, and it says when evening came, it says, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. Now I think this is interesting. So not only is the teaching of the day, all this stuff about the kingdom and our spot in the kingdom, not only is the teaching about the day brought into the story, but the idea that they took Jesus along just as he was. And I think that that's interesting. There in verse 36, it took him along just as he was in the boat. And what does this kind of mean to us? For me, I think about the idea that Jesus is taken, or we're taking Jesus along with us in our life, just as he is. And I'm interested too in thinking about what does that mean, just as he was, just as he is. They took him just as he was. And I'm thinking, what's our context for that? And I start thinking, well, what has Mark told us about Jesus so far? If I go back to the beginning of the book of Mark, I start to see some pretty interesting things that have been revealed about Jesus just from Mark's perspective in the first 3 chapters of his book. As I just begin to go through here, I see that Jesus was announced by John the Baptist, that John the Baptist, who was this amazing preacher and teacher in his own right and drew amazing crowds, was saying that no, he's not the real show. The real thing is getting ready to come and to happen. And he introduced Jesus. I see in the beginning of Mark that a voice came from heaven when Jesus was baptized, a voice that people heard that said that this is my son in whom I'm well pleased. I think that that's an amazing thing. You don't hear that about me, but you heard it about Jesus. And so Jesus is baptized that way. Jesus was tempted. Mark tells us that Jesus was able to overcome temptation. 40 days of temptation in the desert. 40 days of need being piled on top of him, and yet he overcomes temptation. Mark tells us that Jesus began to preach, and when he began to preach, he called people to be followers on his best behalf. Jesus said, if you follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. He's making promises about changing your life and my life. Jesus began to show power over those who had demons and over the demonic. He had power over that. He began to teach people. It says he was an amazing teacher. And not only was he a teacher of amazing quality, but he was a teacher of authority. He not only taught well, but like I say, he could cast out demons. He began, and Mark was teaching us that Jesus began to heal and to take care of people. From personal stories about like Peter's mother-in-law to large crowds where he was healing people of different diseases. He went out and he began to almost to travel, and he would heal and he would preach as he traveled, and he began to draw crowds, and he just kept doing amazing things. There's stories, individual stories in Mark about Jesus healing lepers and how as he performed these miracles, he not only did the miracle, but he began to show things about who he was and his character and how amazing he was and what he was doing. Chapter 2, Mark shares some stories. Jesus heals the paralyzed man who was lowered through the roof. You remember that story? And he's healing people who are coming to him on the Sabbath. And he's doing things to show that a new thing is coming. In fact, Mark talks about the new wineskin and versus the old wineskins. And Jesus was really firmly trying to establish a new relationship with us. Chapter 3, he's healing on the Sabbath. He's doing these amazing things. And Jesus, that they put in the boat that night, that they took along just as he was well established through the first 3 chapters of Mark, that he was the Son of God, that he was an amazing person. And as they kind of put him in the boat and take him for who he was, it should have been obvious, it should have been clear that who they had in the boat with him was the one who had done all of these amazing things. But the pop quiz comes up. And like I say, they get on the boat and this furious squall comes up, this great storm. In fact, if you look at the Greek, there's 3 greats in this passage. There's a great storm, and the word in the Greek is mega. My Bible says furious. Yours might say great. But when it talks about the great storm or the furious storm, that's a mega storm. That's exactly the word that was being used. When they talk about there was dead calm, it was a mega calm. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about. At the end of the chapter, mega is used again when it talks about the fear, the how terrified they were of Jesus because he calmed the storm. And think about the wind and the waves it talks about here. When Jesus calms his storm, he takes 2 approaches to it. First thing he does is calm the wind, and then he calms the waves, and it goes to a dead calm. And I used to try to convince the kids how important it was to wear a seatbelt, because I'd get close to the house, and they'd have their seatbelt on already, and but I would ask them, I go, how fast am I going in the car? And they'd look, and it's about 5 miles an hour. And at 5 miles an hour, if you slam on your brakes at 5 miles an hour, just kick them, it's a pretty good jolt. Going from 5 to stopped immediately like that. And it would shake them up, and they would think it was funny, or they would think it was not funny, either way. But this calming the waves and the wind, it's going to be like that. There's something that's interesting about the fact that it was the waves and the wind that both needed to be calmed. What I think about is it says a furious wind came up, and the wind wouldn't have been a problem if they weren't on a boat. If they were in their homes, if they were even hanging out in some cave somewhere, the wind isn't a problem. It's just noisy and irritating. And it's a little bit like what's going on in our world today. We've got something going on out there that feels like the problem, but for 99.99% of us, it's not the problem. I understand that about 99.5% of the people in the world still don't know anybody personally that's been diagnosed with the coronavirus. That means about 1 out of every 200 people know someone who's been diagnosed, and that might even be a high guess. But the wind is blowing, and it's creating the waves, and the waves are the problem for us. And so when Jesus calms the storm, he stops the wind, he speaks to the wind, and then he speaks to the waves. And you think about the wind causing things, and the way this is written, it says that both ended immediately, that they just stopped. And the image that comes to mind for me is sometimes in movies, you'll see people fairly artistically filmed blowing cigarette smoke out of their mouth. And as the cigarette smoke kind of moves through the air, you can just see it. But it moves and it fades away. And it begins at the breath or at the mouth of the person exhaling that smoke, and then it moves through the air. When Jesus said to stop, it's not a fade away. It just stops. The wind, the creation of the trouble, just stops. And then at the same time, he turns and speaks to the waves that have been pounding up and down and swamping the boat and flooding the boat. And he just says stop, and it says it became a dead calm. And I think about what happened there. It wasn't like the waves just sort of died down naturally from the result of the wind. He told the waves to stop as well. It was the same thing as me slamming on the brakes of my car when I'm going 5 miles an hour. Imagine one of the roughest moments of this boat ride across the lake was when the waves just flat out stopped. And I mean, the boat probably dropped 15 feet, settled hard into the water, the dead calm water, and just stopped there. And that, to me, this is interesting because we've gotten to the part that right before they woke Jesus up. I mentioned I really wish the end of the story, the end of the paragraph was right there. How different would this story be, this chapter be, if after Jesus taught about the parable of the seeds, the parable of the lamp, the parable of the growing seed, these stories, the parable of the mustard seed, the little bit of faith that would be so amazing in these people's lives. And then on this day, after hearing all this, they get on the boat, taking Jesus for all they've known about him, and they get on the boat, and you read as they're crossing this lake, and you get to the point that says Jesus was in the stern sleeping on a cushion. If there was a period there, and we started chapter 5, it would say they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes, and the story would have been so different. It would have been an amazing story of faith for all the disciples. It's like we're terrified. Oh yeah, but look, Jesus is asleep in the back of the boat, and he's calm. We know who he is. I don't think this boat's going to sink. I don't think the boats around us are going to sink tonight because we know who Jesus is. He's been telling us that to know him is going to make things okay. And yet somehow they missed this. And so we have the rest of the passage, which is now become nothing more than a failed pop quiz. Because this is what it would have been like. It would have been so cool if at the end of this trip across the lake, they wake Jesus up and say, boy, you should have seen the storm. And Jesus would have maybe smiled and said, I'm really glad about your faith. I'm glad that you knew that you were with me and that I was with you, and that my sovereignty included even the winds and the waves, and we would have been okay. But instead, we get a little bit of commentary because they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" They didn't pass the test. And I see a lot of this going on in the world today. I'm watching what Christians are doing, and they're experiencing the pop quiz of the wind blowing in the world, and the fact that it's created a series of waves, and the wind blows. We're put under quarantine because of a tiny virus that we don't even see, and for a lot of us, we doubt it because we don't know people that are experiencing any of it yet. I think we need to be very careful of it. I think it's a real wind, but I think that the problem becomes not the wind, not the quarantine, and not the coronavirus. The problem becomes the waves. It becomes the things that are happening to us because of it. Our financial situations, our work situations. The social distancing is hard on relationships. It really is. We become fearful, and we ask questions about what if, and it becomes a difficult time for us. But I see other people that are doing amazing things during this time. The wind is blowing, and they look and they see Jesus where he is, and all of a sudden they figure it's okay. Talked to one person this week who was sharing that she normally has anxiety. She struggled with it for quite some time, and she was saying she got through the first 2 or 3 days, and all of a sudden her faith is just there. She's began to realize that Jesus is going to carry her through anything. I look at other people. I look, and I don't want to steal her crown in heaven, but I watch somebody like Rachel Brown during this time, who has just dedicated almost every waking minute to making other people's journey through some times of waves, through the storm, as comfortable as it can be. Making masks for the hospital, and calling people and making sure they're all right, and providing meals, and just coordinating so much in the middle of the chaos. And we have an opportunity here. It's a test. It's a pop quiz. And we have an opportunity. And one of two things is going to happen during this opportunity. We're going to fail, and we're going to ask questions. What if? Jesus, don't you care? Lord, don't you know what's going on around here? And we're going to fail by asking those questions. And if we do, we're going to find ourselves being confronted by a God who is completely sovereign, who will take care of the problem, but then will turn to look at us with enough in his stare to create fear and terror in our lives. And we recognize that, oh yeah, everything he said yesterday when he was talking about that seed, he's showing me right now that the seed that he's spoken into my life is being choked out by thorns, or for some people, they may have been screaming from the first moment, and they haven't even picked up on it at all. What I'm asking you to consider is, what do you know about the Jesus that you have taken into your life, that you put into your boat just the way he is? I'm asking you to think a little bit about who it is that you know that is asleep on a cushion in the back of the boat during a time that the wind is creating problems in your life, that the time that the wind is maybe swamping your boat and you feel like it's going to sink. I want you to think about who is this that you're committing to. My prayer is that your chapter 4 of the book of Mark ends with looking back at Jesus and recognizing that I'm okay because Jesus is okay in this situation. There is nothing
outside of his control. If he wanted to stop the wind, he could. If he wanted the waves to end, he could do it. He could wake up and do it. If he doesn't wake up, it means that he's not as concerned about it as I am. Not because he doesn't care, not because he doesn't love me, but because he knows that he holds everything in his hands. He knows that nothing exists that doesn't exist without him. He knows who he is. I wish we did as well. So that's my prayer as we look at where we are right now. We're in a time in the world where the wind is blowing, and that wind all by itself is probably not going to be our main problem, but the waves that it creates are going to frighten us. And I want you to think about, what do you know about Jesus? And so my challenge to you right now during this time would be, let's start to learn more and more about the character of Christ and who he is. You have opportunity now to read. You can read through the Gospels. Did you notice how much I was able to bring out about, just what Jesus was and what we could know about him and what we could understand about him, just by looking at the 3 chapters that preceded this 4th chapter in the book of Mark. Mark's one of the ones that he writes the least about the stories of Christ. He's not as in depth as most of the others, and yet there's so much to learn about the character of Jesus. And you know what you could do during this time is every day you can just take and just look in the Gospels and find one spot where you see the character and the nature of Jesus being revealed, and you can pray. And I'd encourage you to pray the Acts prayer as you look at this, ACTS, Acts prayer. Pray a little bit of adoration. A is for adoration, because of what is revealed about Christ right here. And then pray confession that you haven't always lived up to what you know here and what you've seen here. Pray T is for thanksgiving. Be grateful for the character and nature of Christ. There's always room for that. And S is for supplication. This is where you ask him to supply your need according to what you're learning about his character. And you do need, we all need. The boat really is being swamped, and it really is frightening. I'm not telling you that it's not, but I am telling you that when the boat gets swamped and when it looks frightening, turn back and look at the Jesus that you have brought with you. And my prayer is that the Jesus you brought with you is not something that you've just made up, not something weak and flimsy, but it's the Christ who was there at the creation of the universe. That the Jesus that shows up in the 1st chapter of John, that it's the Jesus of all power and of all glory and of all care for you. And look at that Jesus and see that he's asleep on the cushion, completely content with what's going on, totally okay with what's happening in the world, okay with the fact that the wind is blowing and it's causing our boats to be swamped. Because when we get to the other side of the lake and we've done it in faith, you don't have Jesus kind of throwing it back at us that I've taught you and I've taught you and I've taught you. We can be really, really pleased when we get to the other side of the lake that we've walked in faith. And so let me pray. I'm grateful for you all listening to us this way. I think we did have some sound problem. I hope it's better now. But there will be some discussion notes put on the church Facebook page before the end of the day. And then I also want to encourage you, just go to YouTube. And on YouTube, you search Heart of Junction Church, and you'll see the way that we're trying to stay in touch with you. The prayer times that Blythe has been running every day are fantastic, and I hope that you can join in with her in prayer. Zach and I shared a podcast on that page. It'll be up in a little bit if it's not up right now. That talks about our church covenant and how to live it out in this time. And it's a good place to be. I'd encourage you to, as you get on YouTube, to log in so you can comment and interact, especially during the prayer times. We're going to stay together during this difficult time. Let me pray and thank you for joining us today in this unusual way. Father God, I am grateful for the chance to share. It is odd just looking at the back of a phone and trying to keep focused the way we should. And Lord, I'm grateful for Blythe and Zach and Emma and Leeson for doing their best to help us to pull this off today. We're limited today in what we can do. And Lord, I think everyone knows that. So thank you that we can do at least this bit that we've done. I want to pray for each person in our church family who are out there at home or wherever they are. Lord, doing their best to keep Sundays as much yours as they possibly can. Lord, to keep it from blurring in to every other day. I want to say, Father, that I'm praying for every church that preaches Christ in our town and across our nation and around the world. Lord, for the just the difficulty that it is to do these things right now. And Lord, I'm really prayerful that what Satan might mean to harm us when a wind blows, Lord, that can create so much trouble and creates these waves. I pray that what he intends for harm, that you'll turn into great good. My prayer is that churches around our community and around our world are going to learn new things about ourselves. And Lord, that we're going to come out of this better and stronger and different than we were before because of what we've been through. I'm praying, Father, for our people in our church that are in deeper isolation because of the risk factor. I pray for them, Father, that you'll keep them safe. Lord, I've heard there's a church in Arkansas that has over 40 people from their church that have been diagnosed with the virus. And the one at least has already passed away. And Lord, even though it sounds selfish, I want to pray for protection for our people against this. We love our friends and our neighbors, and we don't want to see anybody suffer from this. And so, Father, protect us and keep us safe because we're your children. Lord, thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for who you are. Thank you, Lord, that even when it seems like we're on our own, thank you that we can turn around and see that Jesus is sleeping comfortably in the back of the boat. Lord, help us to just relax in that. It's in his name that we pray. Amen. I want to say one more thing. I am really grateful that many of you have chosen to continue to give to the church during this time. Unfortunately, very little of our church expenditures are ended because we're not meeting together. Our mortgage payment is coming up this week. If you can remember, if you're able, I'd ask you to be faithful, not only to God and to the church, but to each other by continuing to give. And you can do that by giving on the Breeze site, or you can give by sending a check to the church at 755 North 4th. Thanks so much for that. God's blessings to you. We'll see you again later on.